Hey guys, welcome back. We'll be tackling another coding problem today, and that would be the star patterns coding challenge in the JavaScript unit. So in this tutorial right here, I'll just be running through how we can really get started with printing this pattern out right here. And in the second part, I'll be showing you how to print out this pattern. Okay, so let's get right into it. What is this question exactly asked for is something we should really know, and they have some instructions right here. So we know that we'll be using some loops in order to create star patterns. Awesome, that's pretty good information. And we also know that we are given this helper function that allows us to avoid some formatting problems we may face. So this helper function right here seems to be very important, and we'll keep an eye on it so that we can use it to print our stars. Okay, so let's break down our problem right here. So we need to figure out a way to print this pattern right here. We know that a loop just allows us to repeat an action a certain number of times, right? And in this case, our action that we're doing or computing would be drawing the star out. That would be our repetitive action. Okay, so let's start off by seeing, okay, we have this, design. Let's start off with a for loop that allows us to iterate to display the number of rows right here. So we need a for loop that iterates 5 times for the 5 rows right here. So let's quickly create that. Awesome. And what's happening here is if we count the iteration, there is exactly 5. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And since it's less than 5, since I is less than 5, we cannot include 5. Therefore, there's 5 iterations, and that's exactly what we want. Okay. Awesome. So we know that we can repeat an action 5 times, but we don't exactly want to repeat the exact same action 5 times. There's a small change or a small alteration that we need to consider, which is based on the row, we would be printing a different number of stars, right? If we're on the first row, we'll be printing out 1 star, whereas if we're on the second row, we'll be printing out 2, and onwards, it would just be incrementing by 1. And by the time we reach row 5, we'll be printing out 5 stars. So what we have to do is we need to figure out a way to keep track of what row we're on. On top of that, we need to also keep track of how many stars we're printing, right? And this structure or this type of system is what allows us to do it. And this is called a nested for loop. And the basic syntax for it is, just having a for loop within another for loop. And this could go on forever. This could be, a for loop within a for loop within another for loop, and so on and so forth. However, for this specific design pattern, we will just be using 2 for loops that are nested within each other. Okay. Now, how do we achieve this specific, or how do we know to print only 1 star? We need to know what row we're on. Why is that though? Because if we're on row 1, we'll be only printing out 1 star. If we're on row 2, we'll be printing out 2 stars. So we need to figure out a way to reference what row we're on. And when we think about it a bit, we can see that we kind of already did that, right, with our for loop. We know that based on whatever iteration this for loop is on, that's the row that we're also on. So if we're on the first iteration of the outermost loop, that means we're on row 1. Likewise, if we're on the iteration of the fourth outermost loop, then we'll be on the 4th row. So we need to figure out, we need to reference I here and do something with it. And we'll just do this, and I'll explain why we're doing this in a bit. Okay. So why we're doing this is because based on, what row we're on, we'll be printing a number of stars, right? So if we just work through this, we can see that, okay, if we're on row 1, that means I would be 0, and J will start off at 0. So we're saying, okay, is I, it should be greater than or equal to oops. So it should be is I greater than or equal to j. And we're saying, okay, if I is 0 and j is also 0, is so is 0 greater than or equal to 0? And that condition is true, right? So this loop would go through and whatever's in this code segment would run. And then when j is incremented to 1 and I remains as 0, so we're on the first row, we'll be like, okay, I is 0 greater than or equal to 1? And that condition is not true, right? Because 0 is not greater than or equal to 1. Therefore, it'll have to escape this for loop. It'll break out of this for loop and enter this for loop again. And I will be incremented to 1. And if I is incremented to 1, we can go and do this for loop again, okay? So j is going to start off at 0, I is going to be 1, and j is going to be 0. So we're saying, is 1 greater than or equal to 0? 1 is greater than or equal to 0. I increments, is 1 greater than or equal to 0? Sorry, is 1 greater than or equal to 1? And that condition is also true. So we're on our second iteration of printing the star. And that's awesome. So we will print the star twice. And when j increments another time to 2, when I is 1 and j is 2, so 1 is definitely not greater than or equal to 2. And therefore it escapes this loop and the loop goes through until it reaches the 5th iteration. Okay? And within this for loop, we're just going to have to do draw star, our very own helper function, and we're almost done. So it looks like we're done, but we're missing one key step, and I'll show you what we're missing and why we're missing it. So what's happening right now is just printing all the stars on one single line, which is definitely not anywhere close to the design we want here. What's the problem? So the problem is that with our helper function, it's printing out the star that allows us to not push the next element to the new line. Because if we just did console log instead of this helper function right here, what would end up happening is we would just have like a bajillion rows of just stars. Or we would just have like a bunch of stars, but only one star per row, which is not what we want, right? We want a specific pattern. And after that, number of stars, then we would want to, create a new line in order to push the next row to the, new line. However, with this function, there is no new line character. So we need to figure out a way to introduce the new line character, right? And the beauty of console log is that it has an implicit new line terminator, right? So by the end, whenever we call console log, it creates a new line for us right away. So the next output line would be pushed to the next line. And that's kind of what we want. So after this line is outputted, we want the next contents to be pushed onto the new line. Likewise, once this output is produced, we want the next line to be pushed below it, and so on and so forth. Therefore, we use console log to give us this new line character. And once we save this should run once you press run code, and it does, which is exactly what we want in terms of output, and our outputs match. I hope this helped, and give this a shot.